Many years ago, when our children were very young, we had three children at that time, and they were 7, 4, and 2. And the 4-year-old was named Sarah, and she still is Sarah. And I was reading the paper one morning, and we found out that a couple we knew, we weren't in contact with them very often during the year, but we knew them quite well. And they had been in an accident the night before. The wife was driving. I'll call them Bob and Sue. Sue was driving the car, and they had 3 kids in the car, our kids' age, and they had an accident, and the 4-year-old little girl named Sarah was killed. The other 2 kids were injured. They were in the hospital in our town we lived in. The husband was injured. The wife who was driving the car was not injured at all. And of course, it hit Debbie and I very strongly that morning because our kids were at breakfast. And I thought, what if that was us? And we felt badly for the couple that had lost a child. And I was in ministry at that time, and so I decided to go to the hospital about a 30-minute drive away. And so I went to the hospital just to be there with our friends and to show them that we care, that we're there for them, all that sort of stuff that many of you have done often in the past. I didn't know what to say to the people, so I found out what room he was in, and the 2 kids were in 2 separate rooms at the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. And I walked into the room where he was, and Sue was there. The mother, the wife was there. She was uninjured. As I walked into the room, she was very glad to see me. I gave her a hug. I was near tears. They had lost their baby girl. I was in tears thinking about them, thinking about, wonder if that was us. You've been there, right? And she was smiling, and I said, I'm so very sorry. And I hugged her, and I'm crying. She's not crying. She's smiling. She patted me on the back. Thanks for coming, Dave. But honest to God, she said, we're fine. Everything's fine. Sarah, their daughter, who had died the night before, Sue said to me, she's in heaven. You know, we're people of faith. But I knew I'm not the smartest tool in the tool shed, as the many people have told me. But you know, and I know that she was in shock. Everything wasn't fine. She had lost a little girl. Everything wasn't fine. She was driving the car, had the accident, and the story went, she turned back to tell the kids to get their seatbelts on, and she lost control of the car, and it was raining, and the little girl died. She was in shock. The mother was in shock, and so she had this defense barrier up to survive. It's not uncommon. That is kind of common, right? You might have been there, but as the days go by, you have to deal with the reality that you lost somebody. It's called grief. The title of this video is the number one thing you must know about grief in order to have a healthy recovery. What's one of the main things you need to know about grief? And it's this: grief is not the enemy. Grief is not to be avoided. The sad part about the story I just told you, she stayed in this denial for many months. Many months. She held off grief as if it was the enemy. She didn't let grief come to her, probably because of her guilt and her responsibility she felt for not driving well enough to protect her girl. I think we all can understand that, and our hearts go out to this family. This was at least 35 years ago that this happened. We've lost contact with that family. But as I was thinking about this video, what is hindering people from having a healthy recovery after loss? Well, part of it is it just takes time, right? Time doesn't heal all wounds, but what you do with the time can heal wounds, but not heal, but help you live forward with time. But you've got to go to the pit of grief. When you suffer loss of any kind, both death losses, non-death losses, you cannot make grief the enemy. Any attempt to avoid grief is going to delay a healthy recovery from whatever and whomever you have lost. I can't make grief the enemy and try to hold off grief, because here's one of the reasons why. If I try to hold off grief, I'm actually short-circuiting my healthy recovery, because grief is all tied up in love. I grieve because I love. When we had a loss, my wife and I, our family had a loss. You didn't grieve because you didn't know me. You didn't love me. It's not that you hated me. You just didn't know me. That just makes sense, right? No, the closer you are to somebody who you've lost, the deeper you grieve. If you have any culpability, if you have any blame in that in your mind about the one that died, if I'd have only done this, why didn't I do this? Why didn't, all this what if and if only can just dominate our thinking. And what it does, if I have that thinking, I will hold off grief, because if I grieve, I have to admit the truth. Sue had to admit that her 4-year-old little girl was gone. She had to look in the mirror and say, I was the driver. She has to deal with all of this. But if you hold off the grief, what happens is you're stuffing your emotions, and later it's going to come out. And with her, it lasted many months. It wasn't just a shock thing. It was at first, of course, to protect herself. She had an injured husband, 2 other injured kids. It all makes sense. But she can't stay in that state. If she stays in that state of holding off grief, because grief is this big bad thing that we have to hold off, then it's going to hurt other relationships in her life that she hopes to keep. So grief is not your enemy. Any attempt to hold it off will short circuit your recovery. So what do? We have to embrace grief. Embracing grief is not embracing what happened. Embracing grief is giving yourself permission to feel like crap, to cry, to yell, to scream, to do whatever. But you got to go to that pit of grief. Number 1, grief is not your enemy. Number 2, faith is not a substitute for grief. When I went to the hospital, if you remember the story, and I walked in that room, and I was expecting, I don't know what I was expecting. It's way before we started our grief work with Spark of Life. I just knew to show up. I didn't know what to say. I can't fix you with my words. That was in my brain. I can't fix anybody with my words. When you undergo deep, deep loss, words, except I love you, I'm here. Any other attempt to try to fix the person is met with failure, because you can't fix somebody with your words. You can certainly encourage somebody with your presence. I don't know what I was expecting, but when she said, oh, David, we're fine. We're Christians. Sarah is in heaven with God, and so I'm absolutely fine. She was making faith, not intending to, and I'm not trying to pick on her at all, but what that is saying is faith was a substitute for grieving. Faith can't be a substitute for grieving. Great faith people grieved in Scripture, and one of those was Jesus. My God, why have you forsaken me? He said on the cross. He was grieving. Father, save me from this hour. Mark 14. It was for this hour he came, but he still said, Father, save me from this hour. He was grieving. He was grieving the upcoming cross. He was grieving being separated from his Father. He was grieving. God's a griever. God is consumed with grief because he loves us, and he sees the pain out there. Jesus wept at the graveside of Lazarus. God, the Father, God, the Son, grieves. They're acquainted with grief, Isaiah says about God. That God's acquainted with grief. We grieve because we love. We love because God is love. And don't buy into the lie that if you had great faith, you wouldn't feel so bad. Yeah, you might. Yeah, you do. You can have great faith and feel so bad. Read the book of Habakkuk. Read Psalms. 40-something% of all Psalms are lament Psalms. When the writers have great faith in God, and yet they grieve and they speak out against what's happened. I don't like what happened, God. I don't like this. That's called lament, a form of lament, and it's all through Scripture. Great people of faith have great loss and great grief. So faith is not a substitute for grief. Grief is not the enemy. One more point. At Spark of Life, we want to walk beside people who are struggling with their grief. We want to help you not stay stuck in the pit of grief. And oftentimes grievers feel all alone. So at Spark of Life, our mission is to walk beside you. It's to not fix you, because we can't. It's not to take away your pain. I don't think we need to take away your pain. It's to help your pain and your grief not dominate the rest of your life and cause you to give up on love. We grieve because we love. We climb out of the pit of grief when we let grief hit us, when we admit to it, and then when we get back to why we grieve in the first place, it's because we love. And so we don't stop loving if we grieve, if we lose someone we dearly love. No, the way out of the pit's the same way we got in the pit. It's called love. So at Spark of Life, we want to encourage you. We want to empower you, and we want to equip you, encourage you to walk beside you. Grievers often choose to be alone. It's okay to be alone occasionally, but I don't walk through this earth alone. And any attempt to do so will be met with probably frustration and failure. So we want to walk beside you. We want to empower you. You can face your pain, give yourself permission to go to that pit of grief, and then start giving yourself permission in the same breath to do that which helps me breathe the fresh air out of the pit of grief. I will forever be a griever. I'll forever have the pain of losing somebody so dear to me. But that grief, that pain, does not have to debilitate my life and debilitate other important relationships I want to keep. That's the problem, staying in the depths of the pit of grief. So how do I get out of it? Gradually, give myself permission to grieve and permission to love again. And it's scary because I've lost somebody I've loved. And if I get too close to somebody else, I might be hurt again. But the way into the pit of grief is because you love. The way out of the pit of grief that debilitates you forever is to love again. To love those in your life you want to keep. To admit your pain. To admit your loss. To face it. To spend as much time as you need in that pit of grief. But then to realize that you have the power within you to own your own recovery, to embrace grief, and then to fight the debilitating effects of grief, and to get up and live forward with your pain. Spark of Life, there's always hope.